In a flash, she grabbed the glass of water from the table, hurled it straight at the wall less than 8 inches from my head, and called my mother a freeloading old hag. I used to think a punch would leave a bruise, a scream would shatter the air, but then I realized that some wounds, without blood or sound, cut deeper and destroy more thoroughly than any physical blow. They came from the person I loved, from her eyes, from the whispered words that tore my soul apart night after night. And this is the story of how I found the courage to break free from an invisible prison, a prison called love that I once thought would last forever. The punch didn't hurt as much as her gaze. Hello there. I hope all is well with you and that you're finding peace in every moment. Today, I want to share a very personal story with you, one I've kept hidden for years. It's not a tale of great heroes or daring adventures, but the story of an ordinary man grappling with silent battles right in his own home. It's a confession, a warning about a type of violence rarely discussed, yet no less devastating than physical abuse. I hope my story can reach someone, help them recognize the signs, and find their own path. I'm Eric, 40 years old, a technical staff member at a tech company in Portland. My life, on paper, was the epitome of stability and happiness. I had a steady job, a charming 2-story house with a backyard, and an elementary school-age son, little Lucas, who was my entire world. On weekends, people would still see me jogging with my husky around the park or going to the supermarket with Amanda and Lucas. We looked like a model family, a perfect picture of the American dream. I tried to build that image, not just for outsiders to see, but for myself to believe. Amanda and I had been married for 12 years. We met in college. Amanda was smart, sharp, always standing out in a crowd. I was drawn to her confidence and strong personality. Love came quickly, intensely, like a whirlwind sweeping away all reason. I thought I had found my destined half. After we got married, life was truly happy at first. Laughter, future plans, dreams of a small family. We were once 2 perfect pieces, complementing each other. But then, with time, those pieces gradually became unstable, and sharp edges began to show. Behind the closed doors of that seemingly perfect house was a completely different story, a story I never dared to tell anyone, not even my closest friends. Amanda wasn't aggressive in the literal sense, at least, not with punches or bruises. She didn't scream loudly to attract the neighbors' attention. Her violence was more subtle, more silent, but far more toxic and persistent. She hurt me with cold silence that lasted for weeks after every small argument, with sarcastic, cutting remarks that tore at my soul every night, by making me feel useless, inadequate, and undeserving of anything good. Everything you do is silly, clumsy. You can't even manage something so trivial. Her voice was soft, but her tone was filled with contempt. A man who can't earn more than his wife is truly spineless, isn't he? I wonder why I ever chose you back then. The words were as light as a breeze, yet they were like thin razor blades, cutting at my self-esteem, eroding it little by little. Every word was like a cut, no blood, but it seeped in day by day, hour by hour, eating away at my confidence in myself, in my abilities, in my worth. I gradually started to believe what she said. I began to wonder, was I really that useless? Was I truly a pathetic man? Doubt gnawed at my soul, transforming me into a different version of myself, a weak, timid, and insecure version. I tried to explain, tried to defend myself, but she would just sneer or ignore me as if I didn't exist. There you go, justifying yourself again, always you, never taking responsibility. And so, I slowly retreated into my shell. I no longer dared to argue. I learned to be silent, learned to accept her every word as a way to maintain peace in this house, so as not to stir that silent storm. I thought, oh, all couples have moments like this. I thought, she's just stressed. But little did I know, my silence was an invitation for emotional abuse to take over, turning my house into an invisible prison, where I was the prisoner and Amanda was the warden. That was the first and most painful secret. I had trapped myself in a toxic relationship, unaware that I could escape. Violence isn't always clenched fists or bruises on the skin. Sometimes, it hides beneath the guise of concern, sweet words, or even tears. And that's exactly how Amanda hurt me. She didn't need to hit me because she had far more potent weapons control and psychological manipulation. She started controlling every aspect of my life. Finances were the first. Every expense had to go through her. You seem to be spending too extravagantly. Eric, this money is for Lucas's future. She said it gently, but her eyes scanned my spending records like laser beams. Gradually, I was no longer free to spend any amount, not even the smallest. Every time I bought something for myself, I had to brace myself for an unpleasant interrogation or weeks of sarcastic remarks. Then came privacy. My phone. Every evening, when I came home, Amanda would demand to check my phone. Messages, call logs, browse history. Nothing escaped her scrutiny. What are you hiding? Eric, are you seeing someone else? Why do you have to delete your call history? She would ask, her eyes full of suspicion. I protested, tried to hold on to what little privacy I had left. You can't do that, Amanda. I have a right to privacy. I have nothing to hide from you, I said, my voice trembling with anger and indignation, and that's when she would use her ultimate weapon, tears and Lucas. Your dad doesn't love your mom anymore. Your dad has secrets. Your dad doesn't trust your mom. She would wail, tears streaming down her face, deliberately making sure Lucas heard. Lucas, who was only 6 or 7 at the time, would stand there, his small eyes confused, terrified as he looked at his parents. He would run to hug Amanda, comforting his mother, and I stood there, helpless, feeling like a criminal. I couldn't bear to see my son growing up amidst arguments. Seeing his mother cry because of me, I didn't want him to witness those things. Didn't want him to be hurt. And so, I stayed silent. I accepted it. I gave her my phone to check. I let her control our finances. Not because I was wrong, but because I didn't want him to grow up in chaos and suffering. My silence, once again, was the price I chose to pay for the so-called peace in this house. That was the second secret I let the fear of hurting my son dictate my every action, turning me into a man completely devoid of my own voice and will. Her control escalated. Every time I argued back, even the slightest resistance, Amanda would have violent outbursts, leaving no physical trace. Once, when I tried to defend my mother, an elderly and frail woman, whom Amanda called a freeloader, I spoke louder than usual. You have no right to talk about my mother like that. She's my mother. Amanda froze, her eyes suddenly turning terrifyingly cold. Then, in a split second, she picked up a glass of water on the table and threw it straight at the wall less than 20 centimeters from my head. The glass shattered, shards flying everywhere. I flinched, my heart pounding in my chest. She didn't hit me, but that action, that sudden burst of anger, was more frightening than any punch. I regret marrying you. You're useless. You only defend your mother. She screamed, her voice shrill, and then she cried again, sobbing, saying she was stressed from work, from life, because I didn't care about her. She apologized, hugged me, begged me to forgive her, and I forgave her. Again. I was stuck in a vicious cycle of manipulation. She hurt me, then turned herself into the victim, making me feel guilty and forcing me to forgive her. That was the third secret. She didn't need physical force, just emotional manipulation to turn me into her puppet. My life gradually became an inescapable loop. I went to work, came home, and tried to be an invisible shadow to avoid conflict. I slowly withdrew. I no longer hung out with friends after work, no longer participated in enjoyable outings like before. I avoided talking at work, focusing only on my tasks, trying to finish everything as quickly as possible to go home. But even at home, I couldn't find peace. I didn't want anyone to know how I was living. Didn't want anyone to see my weak, manipulated self. My friends started noticing the change. Eric, you've been acting strange lately. You look thinner. Is something wrong? You can talk to me, they asked, their eyes full of concern. But I just offered a forced smile, saying I was busy with work, saying I was focused on a new project. I had learned to hide my emotions, learned to pretend to be happy. The self-doubt, the timidity that Amanda had sown in me grew like a poisonous tree. I no longer believed in myself, no longer dared to make any decisions. I was afraid to face Amanda, afraid of her words, afraid of her unpredictable reactions. I had once been a strong, confident man, but now I was just a shadow of myself. A man always bowing his head, always afraid. Our relationship deteriorated further, not just within our home, but elsewhere, especially when her family was present. I vividly remember one time we went to Amanda's mother's house for dinner. The family meal started quite pleasantly, but then a small story about my work sparked an argument. I simply mentioned that my company was facing some difficulties with a new project, and I was trying to find solutions. There you go, complaining again? Do you know you only talk about negative things? If you keep this up, how will you ever get ahead? Amanda suddenly interrupted, her voice not soft at all but full of mockery. loud enough for both her mother and stepfather to hear. Her mother just lowered her head, and her stepfather pretended to cough to avoid the subject. I was stunned, trying to remain calm. I was just telling a story. Amanda, why do you have to say that? Telling a story. It sounds like the whole world is against you. Look, at your age, and your career is still stagnant. I'm really disappointed in you. Eric? She didn't hesitate to expose me, belittle me right in front of her own parents. Her mother just sighed, and her stepfather avoided my gaze. I felt like I had been slapped hard in the face, but there was no bruise, only shame, embarrassment, and a feeling of being utterly useless. I witnessed her aggression and disdain not only at home, but also in front of her family, and their silence made me feel completely alone. And then, one fateful day, the real alarm bell rang. Not from a friend's words, not from my mother's advice, but from my own son, Lucas. That day, I finished work earlier than usual. A thought suddenly popped into my head. I'll go to Lucas's school to pick him up. He'd be so surprised and happy. I drove to the school, parked in the parent lot, and walked onto the playground. I saw Lucas playing with his friends, his face beaming. I smiled, feeling a rare warmth inside. As I was about to approach Lucas, his homeroom teacher, Miss Emily, walked over. She was a middle-aged woman, kind and very caring towards her students. Miss Emily smiled at me, but there was an indescribable look of concern in her eyes. Hello, Mr. Eric? What a coincidence. I was just about to call you, Ms. Emily said, her tone gentle but serious. Could you come into my office for a moment? I'd like to discuss Lucas a little. My heart sank. Was something wrong with Lucas? I nodded, trying to stay calm. Lucas saw me, waved, and ran to hug me. I patted his back, then told him Dad would go talk to his teacher for a moment. In Ms. Emily's office, the atmosphere became heavy. She placed a stack of drawings in front of me. Mr. Eric, Lucas is a very intelligent and affectionate boy, but recently, he's shown some behaviors that concern me quite a bit. She pointed to a few drawings. One depicted a crying mother, a bowed father, and a child covering his ears in the middle. It was a drawing I had seen at home, but I had fooled myself into thinking it was just a random sketch. Ms. Emily continued. He often draws pictures with dark colors, sad characters. He also speaks less, sometimes even withdrawing during playtime. Yesterday, he was even teased by other children for not wanting to play. When I asked him about it, Lucas just said he was afraid his parents would argue. Then Ms. Emily showed me another drawing. It was a drawing I hadn't seen at home. The picture showed a house covered in dark, ominous clouds, and a withered tree standing solitary in the yard. In the distance, a small figure was running away, and a giant black shadow was chasing it. I broke down, not for myself, but for him. Tears streamed down my face, soaking the drawing. Ms. Emily silently offered me a tissue box. I know this is your family's private matter, but as a teacher, I cannot ignore such signs in a child. I think Lucas is having difficulty expressing his emotions, and he's being affected by what he witnesses at home. Ms. Emily said sincerely, Lucas's pain, my son's fear, jolted me out of my delusion. I had fooled myself into thinking I was protecting him by staying silent, by accepting. But the truth was, my silence was destroying my child. He was growing up in an environment full of fear and anxiety, an environment where emotional abuse was gnawing at all our souls. That was the fourth secret. My silence didn't protect my son. It was destroying his childhood, turning him into an indirect victim of the abuse. And the wake-up call came from an outsider. Lucas's drawing was a direct slap in the face, a painful but necessary wake-up call. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling. Every memory of my marriage to Amanda, of her words, of her manipulative actions, came back vividly. I felt like a fish stranded on land, struggling in vain. I remembered the times I tried to share with Amanda about the pressures at work, about the stress I was facing. She would just be indifferent, even sarcastic. What do you have to worry about? Do you know what I have to put up with? I had always tried to soothe her, putting her needs above my own. I thought that was the way of a good husband, sacrificing for the family. But now, I realize, that was self-destruction. I didn't allow myself to be weak, didn't allow myself to seek help. I remembered the times my friends asked about me, their worried eyes. I remembered my mother's words. She once said, Eric, my son is so strong. Why do you seem so lost lately? I brushed it all off, fooling myself that everything was fine, that I could endure it. But the truth was, I wasn't fine. I was exhausted. I had lost myself. I started researching emotional abuse, psychological manipulation. I read articles, watched videos, and suddenly realized I had been trapped in a toxic relationship for a very long time without knowing it. The signs I had once dismissed, once downplayed, now appeared as clear as day. Financial control, phone checking, belittling remarks, uncontrolled outbursts of anger, followed by tears and apologies to manipulate emotions, all were typical signs of emotional abuse. I had been living in an invisible prison, held captive by fear and manipulation. That truth, though painful, brought a strange sense of release. I was no longer weak, useless. I was a victim, and I had the right to be free. I looked at Lucas sleeping soundly beside me. He was curled up, his small hand clutching his comfort blanket. I didn't want my son to grow up in the shadow of fear. I didn't want him to think that silence was the solution, that accepting abuse was normal. I had to be an example for him, an example of courage, of self-respect, of knowing how to love oneself. The decision was made, clear, firm, and without hesitation. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be tears, there would be harsh words, but I couldn't stay any longer. I had to leave. Not because I no longer loved Amanda, but because I needed to save myself. And more importantly, save Lucas from the invisible phantom haunting his life. I once thought love meant staying, but now I realize, sometimes, loving yourself and loving your child means daring to leave. That was the fifth secret. The awakening of self-worth and love for my child gave me the strength to confront the harsh truth. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was still in its familiar silence. Amanda was still sound asleep. I looked at her face. I no longer saw anger or sarcasm, just weariness. I wondered, was she happy? Did she realize what she was doing? Or was she also trapped in her own problems? I didn't know, but I knew I couldn't pretend any longer. I called my lawyer, a trusted old friend. I told him everything, hiding nothing. He listened patiently, without judgment. When I told him about Lucas's drawing, he just stayed silent. Then, he said something I'll never forget. "Eric, emotional abuse is real, and you are a victim. Never feel ashamed of that." He advised me to find temporary accommodation and start gathering evidence of Amanda's behavior. Evidence I had no bruises, no physical injuries. Messages, emails, recordings of conversations, testimonials from close relatives if possible, and most importantly, your own statements about your mental state. He explained, I realized this wasn't just a simple divorce. It was a legal battle to reclaim my right to live and my right to be a father. Gathering evidence was a painful process. I started recording Amanda's every word, her every controlling action. I took pictures of the messages she sent, the objects she threw and broke. Each piece of evidence was a stab to my heart, reminding me of what I had endured. But I knew I had to do it for Lucas. The day I filed for divorce, it was a Saturday morning. When Lucas was playing in the backyard, I placed the papers on the dining table. Amanda walked in, saw them, and her face went pale. She picked up the papers, scanned them, and then, her face transformed into something I had never seen before, a mixture of intense anger and fear. "What the hell are you doing? Eric, are you crazy? You're a traitor. You dare to abandon me," she shrieked, her voice shrill, without an ounce of gentleness left. She threw the papers to the floor, her trembling fingers pointing directly at my face. "Who do you think you are? You'll never get Lucas. I'll make you regret this." Threats and bitter words poured out like a flood. She lunged at me, intending to hit me. But then, I had prepared myself for this moment. I didn't dodge, nor did I retaliate. I just looked directly into her eyes, my gaze filled with determination, exhaustion, and also pain. "Amanda, I'm no longer the man you can manipulate. I will never let you hurt Lucas. I will fight for him." My words were like a cold splash of water on her face. She froze, her raised hand suddenly dropping. She looked at me, and in that moment, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. Fear of losing control. Fear of facing the truth that I was no longer her puppet. I didn't respond further. I walked into the bedroom, gathered a few essential clothes. I hugged Lucas, who was standing bewildered at the bedroom door. He looked at me, then at his mother, who stood stunned in the living room. I kissed his forehead, whispering, "I love you, son. I will never abandon you." I took Lucas's hand, leading him out of the house we had once called home. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know how long this legal battle would last. But I knew one thing for sure: I had to leave if I wanted to save myself and my son. That was the sixth secret. The act of leaving wasn't weakness, it was the pinnacle of courage. The first step towards reclaiming freedom and protecting those I loved. After leaving the house, Lucas and I temporarily moved into a small apartment belonging to a close friend. The first feeling was a strange sense of relief. No more sarcastic remarks, no more controlling glances, no more phone checks. I could breathe freely, could sleep without nightmares, but that relief only lasted a few days before the real storm hit. Amanda, as expected, reacted frantically. She called me constantly, screaming, cursing, threatening. She sent a barrage of messages, from accusations that I was a traitor, an irresponsible father, to desperate pleas begging me to come back. She tried to convince our mutual friends that I was at fault, that I had abandoned her and Lucas, but thankfully, my true friends always stood by me because they had seen my change over the years. The legal battle began. It was a long, exhausting, and expensive process. Amanda hired a good lawyer, and she didn't hesitate to use every tactic to gain custody of Lucas and most of our assets. She lied about my income, slandered my reputation, and even tried to fabricate stories that I was an alcoholic or a gambler. She also tried to prevent me from seeing Lucas, only allowing me supervised visits, mediations, court hearings, testimonies. Every time I faced Amanda, I felt a new pain. Not because of what she said, but because of the raw truth about a woman I once deeply loved. I saw her transform into a completely different person, a person full of hatred and bitterness. I realized that emotional abuse had deeply embedded itself in her soul, turning her into another victim of her own actions. However, I wasn't alone. By my side was my lawyer, who helped me systematize all the evidence and testimonies. He helped me stand strong against Amanda's attacks. I also had encouragement from my friends, from my parents, those who had always quietly worried about me, and most importantly, I had Lucas. My son, though young, understood some part of what was happening. I tried to reassure him, telling him Dad would always be there for him, that everything would be all right. I wanted Lucas to know that he wasn't to blame for any of this, and that he deserved to live in a peaceful environment. Throughout this process, I had to confront many complex emotions: anger, sadness, regret, and even disappointment. I had to learn to accept the truth that my marriage was over, and I couldn't change Amanda. I had to learn to forgive her, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because I needed to free myself from the burden of hatred, and I also had to learn to forgive myself. Forgive my weakness, my blindness throughout those years. Forgive myself for letting myself be hurt so much. This was a painful but necessary transformation. I lost so many things: a family, a home, and even a part of the person I once knew, but I also found many things: freedom, self-respect, and most importantly, my son, Lucas. That was the seventh secret. True liberation doesn't come from winning the battle, but from forgiving yourself and accepting what cannot be changed. After the court's verdict and as life gradually settled down, I had more time to reflect on the past, on what had happened. I wondered, why did I endure it for so long? Why did I let myself be dragged into the abyss of self-doubt and fear? Perhaps I missed many warning signs, calls for help from myself that I didn't dare to face. I remembered the early years of our marriage. After Lucas was born, Amanda went through a severe period of postpartum depression. She was often tired, irritable, and easily emotional. I tried to be by her side, supporting her as much as I could, but Amanda tended to push me away, withdrawing into herself. "You don't understand, Eric. You don't know how hard it is to be a mother." She often said that. I thought it was part of her depression, and I needed to be more patient, but perhaps it was from that period that the seeds of control and manipulation began to sprout. She gradually became emotionally dependent on me, but expressed it by devaluing me, as a way to keep me by her side. I had unintentionally accepted the role of a bearer of burdens, a compensator, in exchange for a love I mistook for concern. That was the eighth secret. The signs of emotional abuse can stem from deep psychological issues, and I didn't recognize that, making myself a victim. Throughout the years that followed, whenever I tried to share with Amanda about the pressures at work, about the stress I was facing, she would just be indifferent, even sarcastic. "What do you have to worry about? Do you know what I have to put up with? I have to take care of the house, the children, and still earn money too." I had always tried to soothe her, putting her needs above my own. I thought that was the way of a good husband, sacrificing for the family. But now, I realize, that was self-destruction. I didn't allow myself to be weak, didn't allow myself to seek help, because I was afraid she would mock me again, would make me feel like I wasn't good enough. I also remember meetings with friends, They tried many times to pull me out of my shell. "Eric, why don't you play golf anymore? You've been cooped up at home lately," they asked, their eyes full of concern. I just tried to make excuses, claiming busy work. I was afraid to face questions about my married life, afraid to admit that I was living in hell. I had isolated myself from people who could help me, imprisoning myself in loneliness because I was ashamed and afraid. This isolation was one of the abuser's tactics, and I had unintentionally fallen into that trap. I didn't realize that Amanda's loving or caring words were sometimes invisible chains, binding me in this toxic relationship. But perhaps the biggest cry for help came from my own pain. Persistent insomnia, severe headaches, feelings of emptiness and despair with no escape. My body was speaking, my soul was screaming. I tried to ignore it, but finally, Lucas's drawing was the last straw. It wasn't just an alarm bell, it was a loud scream waking me from a long slumber. That scream told me, "Eric, you're slowly dying in your own home. You have to act." I realized that in life, we are often taught how to take care of others, how to sacrifice for love, for family, but few teach us how to love ourselves, how to identify and protect ourselves from toxic relationships. I learned that lesson painfully, but it was truly invaluable. I learned that setting boundaries, saying no to things that hurt me, isn't selfish, it's self-respect. It's necessary for survival. That was the 9th secret: self-destruction. For love isn't true love, but acceptance of abuse, and only by realizing our self-worth can we escape. My life and Lucas's gradually found a new rhythm. Our small apartment is not just a place to live, but a true home, filled with laughter and peace. Lucas is happier and more active every day. He started telling me more about school, about his new friends. I see my son as a carefree, innocent child again, no longer haunted by the fear of arguments or suffocating silence. Lucas has become more confident in extracurricular activities, even winning first prize in the school's art competition. The drawing he made was a family of 2, father and son, building a bright house together under the sun. It was the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen. I still maintain a regular work schedule. My job still involves numbers and machines, but now I see them with a different attitude. I no longer throw myself into work to escape reality, but to fulfill my responsibilities, to build a better future for Lucas. I spend more time with Lucas, with my true friends, and with myself. I've started playing golf again, something I gave up a long time ago. I also joined a support group for victims of emotional abuse. There, I not only share my story, but also listen to others' stories. I realize that many people are struggling with similar silent battles. We encourage each other, share experiences, and seek healing together. Being able to voice what I had endured, being heard and understood by people in similar situations, has helped me release a huge burden from my heart. As for Amanda, I hear she's still struggling to accept everything. She still tries to cause trouble, but I've learned how to deal with it. I no longer react to her harsh words, no longer let her actions affect my life and Lucas's. I believe that one day, she'll also have to face herself and her own issues. I no longer harbor hatred for her. I just hope that, one day, she can find peace for herself. I lost a marriage, but I found myself and my son again. I learned that happiness isn't a destination, it's a journey. And on that journey, sometimes we have to walk through the deepest darkness, confront the most painful truths, and then find the light of peace and rebirth. I believe that Lucas will grow into a strong, confident man who knows how to love himself and protect what he cherishes. That's the final and most meaningful secret after the storm. Peace will come, and new rays of sunshine will light our path. If we dare to move forward, violence doesn't just come from clenched fists, it comes from words, from cold silence, from control, from psychological manipulation, and from drowning others in guilt and worthlessness. These invisible wounds can be more painful and persistent than any bruise. And sometimes, loving yourself means daring to leave the person who once swore to love you forever. If you're stuck in a relationship like that, remember you're not alone. Seek help. Listen to your inner voice. Don't let fear cloud your judgment. Be brave enough to walk away. If my story has touched your heart, or if you have any thoughts or experiences you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to leave a comment below. Hit like and share this story so others can also find their voice, so they don't have to live in the shadow of invisible abuse. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next meaningful and emotional stories I'll bring to you. Thank you for listening, and please cherish the peace you deserve to have. See you in the next video. Goodbye.